I love asymmetry in games. It can come in the form of the setup, where your players have different numbers of pieces or units, or the terrain or topology of the board. It can come in the kinds of pieces that you have and the way those pieces behave. It can emerge from player choices, or it can happen because of different goals of the player, whether by the game design or by player choice. With asymmetry, it's almost as if each player is playing a different game on the same board with overlapping concerns. Examples of asymmetry in more mainstream games, particularly card games, since Mahjong is essentially a card game version of a played with tiles, would be Canasta, where the red threes are special. You also have wild cards in that game. Or Pinochle, where you have pairs like that that have special meaning in the game or score special. Cribbage, which has a special thing with jacks. And there's also Tichu, which has special scoring for 5s, 10s, and kings. And it also has 4 special cards: the dragon, the phoenix, and the dog. Oh yeah, I think there's a 4th card in Tichu. What's it called again? Oh yeah, the Mahjong. Speaking of Mahjong, this video is about asymmetry in Mahjong, specifically Ricci or Japanese Mahjong. I'm just going to call it Mahjong here, but some of the concepts only exist in Ricci specifically. This is not a tutorial. There's an amazing video series on YouTube that teaches this game, and I'll put a link to it in the comments. I'm just going to describe enough of the game here to provide context for my comments on asymmetry. So Mahjong is essentially a form of rummy for 4 players. Each player has a hand of 13 tiles, something like this. And when it's your turn to play, you'll draw a tile from the wall, or call a tile that someone else has discarded. You'll add it to your hand, and then you'll discard a tile, which could be the tile you picked up or a different tile. And you'll essentially just keep doing that around the table until someone goes out or until the tiles run out. To go out, you need 4 melds and a pair. Note that there are also other conditions to going out. So what are melds? A meld can either be 3 of a kind, 3 tiles of exactly the same type, picture, suit, or it can be a sequence of 3 number tiles in a row. These happen to be the 2, 3, and 4 tiles of the character suit. Also note that you do not discard at the end when you go out, like in some rummy games. You keep the tile you drew or called, and you go out with a 14 tile hand. There's a ton more going on in the game, but that's enough context to get started discussing asymmetry. So, asymmetry number 1, the tile types. Not all tiles are equal in the same way as a normal deck of cards. So you can see here, these are the tiles in Mahjong. There are 34 of them, 34 different kinds of tiles, and there are 4 of each of these, making up a total of 136 tiles in the game. Okay, the tiles on the left are in 3 suits: dots, characters, and bamboo. And I've ordered them 1 through 9, left to right. The tiles on the right are called honors. These 4 are the winds: east, south, west, and north. And these 3 are the dragons: white, green, and red. Notice that this tile is not actually green here, but it is still called the green dragon. The asymmetry here comes from the fact that with any of the tiles that in the whole game, you can make a set of 3, because there are 4 of each of them. But only with the numbered tiles on the left here can you form sequences. So it's much more difficult to make melds with the honors. It's also more difficult to make melds with the tiles on the end of the number sequences, because, if, for example, if you have a 5, you can get the 3 and 4, or the 6 and 7, or the 4 and 6 to make a sequence out of the 5. But if you have a 1, you have to get the 2 and the 3 if you want to make a sequence. Likewise, if you have the 9, you have to get the 7 and 8 to make a sequence. So there's a lot of asymmetry just in the tile distribution. Asymmetry number 2, calling discards. If I have 2 tiles that are the same, and any player discards the third one, I can call that to form a set of 3. However, if I have 2 tiles in sequence of the same suit, I can only call a discard made by the player to my left. If the player to my right discards this tile, or the player opposite me discards this tile, I'm not allowed to call it. And the difference there is sets versus sequences. By the way, you are allowed to call a tile that completes a sequence if you are going out with that tile. Asymmetry number 3 is turn order. Players sit around the table in positions that are identified by the wins. So these would be the names of the wins for the players' positions around the table. The dealer sits at the east wind. And if I play, these tiles aren't really meant, these tiles are just meant to represent players' positions, not really tiles in the game. If I discard a tile and the player across from me calls that tile, it's now this player's turn, completely skipping the player sitting south. And after this player discards, it'll now be north's turn. And if it gets to me again and I discard another tile, and the same west player calls that, skips south again. So that's a very asymmetric thing in this game. Asymmetry number 4 is all to do with the dealer, and there are 2 things. The dealer always sits east, and when the hand is over, the seat position, which is actually indicated by a piece like this, will get passed to the left, to the right, and the seat positions will move with it. So essentially, if you're sitting east, you will become north on the next turn. The player who goes out calculates the value of their hand, and all the other players pay them that many points. The dealer pays double. So in this case, if I'm north and I have a 1,000-point hand, I get paid 1,000 points by the west player, 1,000 points by the south player, and 2,000 points by the dealer. If the dealer goes out, all the other players pay double the value of the hand. So a 1,000-point hand over here would be 2,000, 2,000, 2,000. So that makes being the dealer good and bad, because you get double, but you also pay double. Also, if the dealer is the one who goes out, then the dealer does not pass to the right. It stays here, and you essentially re-deal the hand. You score it as normal, but you play as if you're replaying that same hand. Asymmetry number 5 is Dora. There are 4 kinds of Dora. This first one is optional, but what will often happen in Ricci is that some of the 5s in each suit, each number suit, are replaced by a red tile. That tile becomes a bonus tile that's worth more points if you go out with them. That's the first one. The other 3 are all to do with what's called the dead wall. So, at the beginning of each hand, if you've seen some pictures, you stack up all the tiles into a 2-high wall, forming a large square, 17 tiles on a side. and that wall is broken at one point so that the tiles can be drawn around the table. The last 14 tiles in the wall are not in play. They're considered the dead wall. But one tile, 3 from the end, is flipped face up. And this tile is called the Dora indicator. The tile immediately following this tile in the sequence, so in this case the 4 of dots is the indicator. The Dora is actually the 5 of dots. It's the tile that comes immediately after that tile in the sequence. And the reason for that is because if the 4 was actually the Dora, there'd only be 3 of them left. So using the next tile means there's more likely a chance for there to be all 4 of that tile in play. If this happened to be the 9, then the Dora would be the 1. It wraps around. Likewise for the winds, if the wind is the wind order is clockwise around the compass, so east, south, west, north. So if east is the Dora indicator, then the Dora tile is south. Likewise with the dragons, they're often shown in this order, but since they wrap around, I like to think of them in this order because green, red, white is alphabetical order. So if the Dora indicator was green dragon, then the red dragon is the Dora. And again, all Dora tiles are worth more points in your hand if you go out with them. So the first dead wall Dora is just the one that's flipped up at the start of the hand. And that's different every time. The second one is called a con Dora. A con is when, instead of making a set with 3 tiles, if you make a set with 4, let me try to find my west, there we go. If I happen to either have 4 in my hand or call a 4, a 4th tile when I've got 3 in my hand, I can actually make a set out of them. But when you do that, you're removing an extra tile from your hand, and so your hand is smaller, and you need to keep your hand large enough so that you can form 4 melds and a pair. In order to compensate for that, once you play a con, or 4 of a kind, you actually add a tile from this end of the wall to your hand to make up the difference, and you flip up another one of these, like so. So now your hand is back to normal, and there are now 2 Dora indicators. So in this case, the 5 of dots is a Dora tile as normal, and now the tile following the white dragon, wrapping around the end, is the green dragon. So 5 of dots and green dragons are now both bonus tiles in this game. So you may want to get this con down on the table, but you're potentially giving another player who might go out before you extra points because now they may have some green dragons in their hand. The last kind of Dora are called Dora, which are all of the tiles that are underneath these face-up tiles. If you go out and you have called Ricci, and I'll talk about what that means later on, if you've called Ricci and you go out, you also get to count the tiles underneath these 2, or however many are face up, as Dora indicators. So in this case, the 5 of dots count twice. So if you have 4 5-dot tiles in your hand, you now have 8 Dora. Green dragon and the 2 of characters. So you'd have all these possible tiles that are Dora. Asymmetry number 6. This is kind of complicated. It still catches me every once in a while. Here's an example hand. As you play and you make your discards, you put them into a 6-tile wide, potentially 3-row tall arrangement in front of you. So all players can see all players' discards, who discarded what and in what order. So I'll split these tiles up by kind of like their normal groupings here. So the concept of Furiten means that you are not allowed to call a tile that someone has discarded if you have discarded a tile that makes your hand completed, ever. So in this case, you can see here that I have the only tiles that can make my hand complete, right? You need 4 melds in a pair. Here's 1 meld, 2 meld, 3 meld. Here's my pair. My fourth possible meld would be if I could draw a 3 or a 6 of bamboo. Notice how I've discarded a 6 of bamboo. So I am 30-10 right now. If somebody discards a 6, anybody discards a 6, I am not allowed to go out. And it's not just because I've discarded a 6. It's not because it matches. If somebody discarded a 3, I am also not allowed to go out. Even though it completes my hand, I didn't discard a 3. But because I've discarded a tile that would complete my hand, I'm not allowed to go out. I must come up with a way to change the structure of my hand in such a way that none of my discards would complete my hand. And this is not, at first, easy to do when you're playing this game. But what's asymmetric about this? Let's say that the player to my right has the same exact hand, and they haven't discarded either of those 2 tiles. They can go out, they can call this discard, yet me with the same hand, I cannot call that discard. In order to talk about the last 2 asymmetries, I need to discuss 2 things. The first is called Yaku. In order to go out, you not only need to have 4 melds in a pair, you not only have to not be Furiten, but you have to have at least 1 Yaku. And a Yaku is either a specific situation or hand pattern that you have to either create or cause, and I'll talk about a couple of those in a minute. The other concept is an open or closed hand. So if I have, initially your hand is closed, all your tiles are just sitting in your hand, and anytime you call a discard by another player and you add it to your hand, you're actually playing that meld to the board, just the same way that you would in rummy game. When you pick up a discard, you lay those cards on the table face up. You keep the rest of your hand hidden. But as soon as you put some tiles face up, your hand is now open. And some things are not available to you when your hand is open. And so the disadvantage is that you can't form as many Yaku as you would like when your hand is open. But it allows you to potentially accumulate tiles that you might not otherwise have access to. So there's that trade-off. So asymmetry number 7 is the winds. Remember how I talked about the seating positions. These are the 4 seating positions. The first 4 hands of the game are considered to be the east round. And after those 4 hands are done, if you play a full 2-round game, then you switch and you play 4 hands as the south round. The round of the game that it is, that wind, is, you can make a set of that wind that qualifies as a Yaku, which allows you to go out. So in the first 4 hands, if you can make a set of east, like so, then you can go out when you have an otherwise qualifying hand. The other thing you can do is to make a set of your own wind. So in this case, if the west player actually has 3 west tiles, that is a Yaku for them. It would not be a Yaku for me. Note that 3 east tiles for the east player is 2 Yaku, both the round wind and the seat wind. The last asymmetry is Ricci itself. This one's a little subtle, but I couldn't talk about the game without talking about its namesake. Let's say you have this hand. I'll break it up like this. Now I don't want to get enough into the rules to describe why, but with this hand it's very difficult to make a Yaku. If you haven't opened this hand, if you haven't called any tiles by any other players, you could potentially, right, you've got a closed meld here and a closed meld here. You've got two pair, either of which could become a meld on their own. And then you have this 2-3-5, which could become a 1-2-3 or a 2-3-4. But the only way that you can make an easy Yaku out of this hand without calling Ricci is by drawing one of these two tiles here yourself and making a three of a kind out of one of these two. But doing that is relying on the luck of the draw. If you call Ricci, what you're doing is you're betting 1,000 of your points that you will go out first. And a Ricci immediately qualifies you as having a Yaku. It also means that you're now allowed to call a tile that makes your hand go out when you couldn't otherwise do so. So it opens up tiles that are discarded by all the other players. So let's say that you have this hand and you draw this tile from the wall. Well, now you can make this set, and now you are one tile away from going out. In this case, you can call Ricci. Right? You bet your 1,000 points, you discard this tile, and now any player that discards a 1 or a 4 of dots, you can call that tile and go out. So the advantages of calling Ricci, like I said, are that it gives you a Yaku, which qualifies your hand to go out. It increases your score if you do go out. It gives you access to the Dora tiles underneath the dead wall for additional possible bonuses. The disadvantage is that your hand is locked. You are no longer allowed to change your hand in any way. For example, let's say that somebody made a con and flipped up a tile, a Dora indicator that made north a Dora tile. And then later on you drew a north tile. You can't put the north there and discard, for example, this tile. You're not allowed to change the structure of your hand. You're stuck only waiting for the same tiles that you would otherwise be waiting for at the moment that you called Ricci. And also, if somebody else goes out before you, you lose the points, the 1,000-point bet that you made. And like I said, this is a subtle thing because when you call Ricci, it puts you in a different circumstance from the other players in that you cannot change your hand. The other players now know you're one away from going out, so they can be more careful. They can discard things that you've discarded previously. So that's it for the game. That's it for my discussion about asymmetry. So go and watch the tutorial videos and enjoy it.